Before we start, let's agree on the importance of calling situations and matters with appropriate righteous names. Do we? So, you think you know corruption, huh? You've seen Godfather, House of Cards, maybe even dipped your toes into the swamp of Chicago politics. But let me tell you, folks, you ain't seen nothing yet until you've had a whiff of the sweet, fetid aroma of Slovakian corruption. Yes, Slovakia, land of majestic mountains, charming castles, and more crooked politicians than you can shake a shepherd's axe at. This ain't your run-of-the-mill petty bribery here, folks. This is Olympic-level graft. A symphony of sleaze conducted with the finesse of a freaking maestro. And that's what we're diving into today, my friends, the Zlofakian Saga. A tragicomedy, a farce, a goddamn Shakespearean tragedy all rolled into one. We're talking about scandals so brazen, so ludicrous, they make Nixon look like an altar boy. So strap yourselves in, adjust your cynicism detectors, and get ready for a wild ride through the underbelly of a nation where the only thing thicker than the goulash is the corruption. Let's kick things off with a classic case of environmental hypocrisy, the kind that would make even the most jaded oil executive blush. Picture this. Slovakia, a country smaller than West Virginia, somehow manages to sell off its entire yearly allowance of emission quotas. Now, you'd think they'd at least get a decent price for these things, right? These are valuable permits, allowing companies to pollute to their heart's content. But no, our Slovakian friends, in their infinite wisdom, decided to practically give them away. We're talking bargain basement prices, folks, like 2-for-1 hot dog day at the ballpark cheap. And who benefited from this fire sale of environmental responsibility? Well, let's just say it wasn't the Slovakian people who ended up footing the bill for the lost revenue. No, the real winners were a shadowy cabal of businessmen and their pet politicians who walked away with millions while the rest of the country choked on their fumes. It's enough to make you want to trade in your lungs for a gas mask. All right, folks, buckle up, because we're about to delve into the murky world of Slovakian public procurement, where transparency goes to die and shady deals are born. And let me tell you, this ain't your grandma's church bake sale. This is high stakes, big money shenanigans. We're talking about a system so rigged, so blatantly corrupt, that it would make a mafia accountant blush. And the name of this game, my friends, is the Nástenkový Tender, which loosely translated means notice board tender. Now, you might be thinking, notice board, what is this, the 1800s? Well, you're not far off, because the level of sophistication in this system is about on par with using smoke signals to communicate. Instead of, using these newfangled things called websites or open bidding processes, government contracts in Slovakia are often announced with little fanfare on obscure notice boards, tucked away in government buildings that probably haven't seen a fresh coat of paint since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And these announcements, they're not exactly models of transparency. We're talking vague descriptions, impossible deadlines, and enough loopholes to make a Swiss cheese jealous. It's almost like they're intentionally trying to make it impossible for anyone who's not in on the fix to even apply. But of course, that's the whole point, isn't it? Because while the average Slovakian Joe is busy trying to decipher these cryptic messages, the real players are busy cutting backroom deals, divvying up the spoils like a pack of hyenas on a fresh carcass. And the consequences of this blatant disregard for fairness and transparency, well, they're about as predictable as a hangover after a night of tequila shots, inflated prices, shoddy work, and a whole lot of taxpayer money lining the pockets of corrupt officials and their cronies. See, when you eliminate competition and operate in the shadows, you create a breeding ground for waste, fraud, and abuse. It's like leaving a pack of hungry wolves in charge of a chicken coop. What could possibly go wrong? And the worst part? The Slovakian people are left footing the bill for this rigged game, paying for overpriced projects and substandard services, while the real winners laugh all the way to the bank. So you think you've heard it all, huh? You think the Emission Scandal and the Wall of Shame were bad? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because we're about to dive headfirst into the fetid swamp of the Gorila Tapes. Picture this. It's 2005, the year YouTube was invented, and some bright spark in the Slovak intelligence service decides to bug an apartment. Why? Because they suspected a businessman, and I use that term loosely, was bribing government officials. And boy, were they right. This wasn't just a couple of palms being greased. This was a full-blown orgy of greed and corruption. For 2 long years, these tapes recorded every shady deal, every backroom promise, every chuckle, as they divvied up the country's wealth like a bunch of hyenas on a carcass. And who were these fine, upstanding citizens caught with their hands in the cookie jar? Oh, just a who's who of Slovak politicians, businessmen, and their assorted hangers-on. They thought they were being slick, whispering about their schemes like mobsters in a back alley. Little did they know their every word was being recorded for posterity. Talk about your unintended consequences. Now, I know what you're thinking. This gorilla thing sounds like a John le Carré novel, and you wouldn't be far off. These tapes read like a how-to guide for organized crime, except the criminals are wearing suits and ties instead of tracksuits. We're talking millions upon millions of euros changing hands, all to secure lucrative government contracts, rig privatizations, and generally ensure that the rich got richer while the rest of the country got screwed. It was like a scene out of Goodfellas, but instead of whacking guys, they were whacking the entire Slovak economy. And the best part? When these tapes finally surfaced in 2011, leaked by a mysterious figure known only as the Gorilla, the whole country went apeshit. Protests erupted in the streets. People were outraged, and rightfully so. They had been robbed blind by the very people they elected to represent them. But here's the kicker. Despite the damning evidence, the blatant corruption laid bare for all to see, almost nobody went to jail. That's right, folks, the biggest scandal in Slovak history. And the bad guys basically walked away scot-free. Now, I'm not a cynical man. Okay, maybe I am, but even I have to admit, the lack of accountability in the wake of the Gorila Tapes is enough to make your blood boil. These weren't just victimless crimes, they were crimes against the Slovak people, crimes that robbed them of their future. Think about it, the money these crooks stole could have been used to build schools, hospitals, roads, you name it, but instead it went into their pockets, lining their already overflowing coffers while ordinary Slovaks struggled to make ends meet. And what did they get for their troubles? A slap on the wrist, a promise to do better next time, a whole lot of nothing. Justice delayed is justice denied, as they say, and in the case of the Gorila Tapes, justice seems to have taken a permanent vacation. But hey, don't despair, because the story doesn't end there. Oh no, my friends, we're just getting started. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this saga of corruption, greed, and the fight for justice in the heart of Europe. You won't want to miss it. So you think we've hit rock bottom already? You think stolen air and rigged contracts are the low point? Folks, this ain't a limbo contest. This is Slovakia, where the bottom is an illusion, like a politician's promise. Enter Jan Kuciak, a journalist, a real one, not the kind who reports on which celebrity chef just opened a hot dog stand. He was digging where the dirt was thickest, into the stinking underbelly of Kočner's empire. And what happens to people who poke around in the dark? Yeah, sometimes they find a lost $20, but sometimes they find a bullet. Guess which one Kuciak found? February 2018, Kuciak and his fiancée Martina Kusnerova are found murdered in their home, execution style. A message loud and clear as a goddamn siren: don't mess with the big boys, especially when they've got their hands elbow deep in the cookie jar. The nation for once is united, not by some phony patriotic song and dance, but by sheer, unadulterated outrage. People took to the streets, candles in hand, faces lit with a fury I haven't seen since they ran out of that cheap Slovak beer. They marched, they chanted, they demanded justice, they demanded change. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, things might actually be different. Marion Kočner. Remember that name, folks, because it's going to be popping up more often than a telemarketer at dinner time. This ain't just some two-bit crook. This is a guy who plays chess while everyone else is playing checkers. He's got judges and politicians in his pocket, businessmen eating out of his hand, and enough dirt on everyone to fertilize a small country. Kočner's network, that's what they called it, a tangled web of corruption that stretched from the highest courts to the darkest corners of the underworld. It was like a scene out of a bad mafia movie, only this was real life, and the stakes were higher than a giraffe's ass at a limbo contest. This was about power, pure and simple, the kind of power that corrupts absolutely, the kind that turns otherwise decent human beings into greedy, power-hungry monsters. And Kočner, he was the conductor, the puppet master, pulling the strings and making everyone dance to his tune. You know what's more messed up than a soup sandwich? A justice system where the judges are bought and paid for like cheap suits. That's right, folks. Kochner wasn't just content with bribing politicians and businessmen. He had to go and corrupt the very foundation of a functioning society. The judiciary. He had judges on his payroll, judges who would rule in his favor faster than you can say kangaroo court. Land disputes, business deals, even criminal charges all magically disappeared with a little help from his friends in black robes. It was like having a get-out-of-jail-free card. Only this one came with a gavel and a lifetime appointment. And the best part, these judges, these supposed guardians of justice, they weren't even subtle about it. They were arrogant, brazen, convinced they were untouchable. They acted like they owned the place, and in a way they did. They owned the courts, they owned the law, and they sure as hell owned the poor saps who dared to challenge them. So you've got this corrupt businessman pulling the strings, you've got judges in his pocket, politicians on his payroll, and the whole country is basically being held hostage by this network of greed and deceit. It's enough to make you want to scream or laugh, or maybe do both at the same time, which, come to think of it, is a pretty good description of life in Slovakia these days. But here's the thing about corruption, folks. It thrives in the shadows. It festers and grows in the dark, like mushrooms in a damp basement. But when you shine a light on it, when you expose it for what it really is, it starts to wither and die. And that's what young Kuciak was trying to do. He was shining a light on the darkness, exposing the truth, and for that they killed him. They thought they could silence him. But they were wrong, because his death, as tragic and senseless as it was, ignited a firestorm of anger and outrage that spread throughout the country and beyond. The people of Slovakia had finally had enough. They were tired of being lied to, tired of being robbed blind, tired of being treated like mushrooms kept in the dark and fed bullshit. So there you have it, folks, the Zlofakian Saga Slovakia's Olympic-level corruption. 31 years of greed, graft, and government gone wild. It's a tragicomedy, really, equal parts farce and fury, with a healthy dose of absurdity thrown in for good measure. We've got stolen air, rigged contracts, murdered journalists, judges for sale, and a cast of characters so shady they make the mafia look like a bunch of choir boys. You couldn't make this stuff up if you tried. But here's the thing, this ain't no joke. This is real life. And the punchline is on us, the citizens, the taxpayers, the ones left holding the bag while the crooks and their cronies make off with the loot. But hey, maybe there's hope yet. Maybe one day Slovakia will wake up from this bad dream, shake off the stench of corruption, and finally start living up to its potential. Until then, the show goes on. Stay tuned, folks, because you never know what will happen next in this crazy, mixed-up country we call home. Vivat Slovakia! This documentary is created by Anulum with a deep love for reason in mind. Please subscribe, support, and provide constructive feedback. Miro would be the first to thank you.